The bar glowed like liquid gold. Crystal glassware caught the light from vintage Edison bulbs hanging above polished mahogany, and the low hum of conversation mixed with soft jazz from the corner piano. Couples laughed over wine. Business deals were sealed with handshakes. Everything looked warm, civilized, safe. But at the corner table near the window, Vivian Sterling sat perfectly still, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She kept her eyes down, focused on the barely touched martini in front of her, trying to disappear into the leather booth. This was a mistake. She'd known it the second she agreed to meet him. But Julian Reed had been relentless. Texts every morning, calls that went to voicemail but never stopped coming. Flowers left outside her apartment door with notes that read, "We need to talk," in that precise handwriting she used to find charming. He'd shown up at her office twice. Her friends told her to ignore him. Her therapist said to block him. But Julian didn't take no for an answer. He never had. "You look stunning tonight, Vivian," Julian said, his voice smooth and warm enough for anyone nearby to hear. To them, he probably sounded like a man in love. But Vivian heard the razor edge beneath it. His smile was perfect. White teeth, dimpled charm, the kind of smile that had once made her feel chosen. Now it only made her stomach twist. "I've missed you," he continued, leaning slightly forward. "Don't you miss what we had?" Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. She wanted to say no. I wanted to stand up and walk away. But her body remembered things her mind kept trying to bury. The bruises she'd hidden under turtlenecks and long sleeves. The nights she'd spent locked in the bathroom, crying silently so the neighbors wouldn't hear. The apologies that came wrapped in expensive gifts and promises that never, ever lasted. Instead, she nodded, just barely. Her throat was too tight to speak. "That's my girl," Julian murmured, and the possessiveness in those words made her skin crawl. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple reconnecting, intimate, romantic. No one could see his hand under the table, gripping her wrist hard enough to leave marks, his thumb pressing deliberately into the spot where the old bruises had finally faded. "I've been thinking about tonight," Julian said, his voice dropping into that tone she knew too well, the one that meant he was furious, the one that meant he'd been holding something back all evening, letting it build. Her pulse spiked. "When we leave here," he whispered, leaning close enough that his breath ghosted against her ear, "you're going to be covered in bruises, for thinking you could just walk away, for ignoring me, for making me chase you around like some pathetic fool." Vivian's stomach lurched. The dim lighting of the bar suddenly felt suffocating. She stared at the untouched plate of food in front of her, seared scallops that had looked beautiful when they arrived, but now seemed obscene. She wanted to scream, wanted to stand up and shout for help, but who would believe her? Julian was a senior consultant at a respected firm. He donated to charities. He had references, connections, a spotless reputation. And Vivian? She was quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of woman people forgot in crowded rooms. If she accused him here, in public, he'd twist it, make her look unstable, jealous, desperate. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. "Nothing to say?" Julian asked, his smile widening as a waiter passed their table. "That's good, Vivian. That's very good. You're learning." She blinked back tears, refusing to let them fall. Crying only made it worse. It fed something dark in him, something that enjoyed her fear. That's when she noticed the man at the next table. He sat alone, a glass of whiskey resting near his hand, dressed in a navy suit so impeccably tailored, it looked like it had been designed specifically for him. His dark hair was swept back, revealing sharp cheekbones and a jaw that could have been carved from stone. Even his watch, sleek, minimal, clearly expensive, seemed deliberate. He looked like power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. But what struck Vivian most was the stillness around him. While the rest of the bar hummed with energy, laughter, clinking glasses, animated conversations, he sat in perfect, controlled silence. His attention seemed fixed on his drink, his posture relaxed, almost lazy, except Vivian noticed the subtle shift. The way his fingers had stopped moving against the glass, the slight tilt of his head, the tension that had appeared in his shoulders. He'd heard. She was sure of it. For just a moment their eyes met. His were dark, nearly black in the amber light, and there was something in them she couldn't name. Not pity. God, she'd seen enough pity to last a lifetime. But something else. Something that made her breath catch in her throat. Then Julian's voice snapped her back. "I'm going to the restroom," he said, squeezing her shoulder hard enough to make her wince. "Don't even think about leaving, Vivian. You know I'll find you." His smile never wavered. "I always do." He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked away with that confident stride that once made her feel safe, but now only filled her with dread. The moment he disappeared around the corner, Vivian exhaled. For a few precious seconds, she could breathe, and then the man from the next table moved. He didn't rush. There was no urgency, no performance, just a deliberate, unhurried grace that commanded attention without asking for it. He stood, tall, powerfully built, beneath that suit, and walked the few steps to her table. He looked down at her with those intense, unreadable eyes. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice low and controlled, with the faintest trace of an Italian accent. "But I couldn't help overhearing your companion." He paused. "Are you here by choice?" Vivian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Who was this man? What did he want? Was this some kind of trap? He seemed to understand her hesitation.
"My name is Alessandro Valenti," he said quietly. "I own several businesses in this city, and I make it a point to know when someone is being threatened near me." His gaze didn't waver. "I heard what he said to you. Every word." Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. "You don't have to explain anything," Alessandro continued, his tone gentle but firm. "I am simply asking if you want to leave here safely. That's all. Just yes or no." Something in the way he asked, without demanding, without judgment, made her believe him. In all the months with Julian, no one had ever asked her what she wanted. They'd told her she should leave, that she deserved better, but no one had ever actually offered to help her do it. Not like this. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." Alessandro nodded once, as if that settled everything.
He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then slipped it back into his pocket with the same precise efficiency. "2 of my men are at the entrance," he said. "When he returns, they'll make sure he doesn't approach you. You'll walk out with me." He paused. "Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight?" "My apartment. He knows where you live." It wasn't a question. Vivian's throat tightened. "Yes." "You'll stay somewhere else tonight. I'll arrange it." Before she could respond, Julian returned. The moment he saw Alessandro standing beside their table, his expression shifted. The mask cracked. The charm slipped. Anger flashed across his face. "Who the hell are you?" Julian demanded, his voice rising just enough to draw a few glances. Alessandro turned to face him, and Vivian watched something extraordinary happen. Julian, who had terrorized her for months, who had made her feel small and powerless, actually took a step back. There was something in Alessandro's posture, in the way he held himself, that radiated danger more effectively than any shouted threat ever could. "I'm the man who heard every word you said to her," Alessandro replied, his voice calm, almost casual. He took a single step forward. "I know your name is Wayne. Julian I know where you work. I know where you live. And I know that if you take one more step toward this woman, you'll regret it for the rest of your considerably shortened life." Julian's face went pale. Alessandro's expression didn't change. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "She's leaving with me," Alessandro said. "You're going to stay here, finish your drink, and walk out alone. And if I ever hear that you've contacted her again, if I hear you've so much as looked in her direction, I will make it my personal priority to ensure you disappear." He let the words settle. "Do we understand each other?" Julian opened his mouth, closed it. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he didn't move. "Good," Alessandro said. He turned back to Vivian,
his expression softening just slightly. "Let's go." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian stood up and walked away. Alessandro's hand rested lightly on the small of Vivian's back as they moved toward the exit, not possessive, but protective, grounding. Behind them, Julian's voice rose. "You can't just— Vivian, wait!" Alessandro didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him, but Vivian felt the subtle shift in his posture, the coiled readiness beneath that expensive suit. Julian's footsteps quickened. "Vivian, don't be stupid. You don't even know this man." That's when Alessandro stopped. He turned slowly, deliberately, and the movement alone made Julian freeze mid-stride. Two men in dark suits had appeared near the entrance, silent, watchful, positioned like sentries. "You're right," Alessandro said, his voice carrying just enough to cut through the ambient noise. "She doesn't know me, but I know you." Julian Michael Reed. Julian's face was drained of color. Consultant at Hartwell and Associates. Third floor, corner office. You live at 2847 Ashland Avenue, apartment 6C. Alessandro's tone remained conversational, almost pleasant. "You drive a silver Audi. License plate JMR 4739. Your mother's name is Patricia. She lives in Naperville and calls you every Sunday at 9. How do you— You've been reprimanded twice at work for inappropriate behavior toward female colleagues," Alessandro continued, each word precise as a scalpel. "The complaints were buried. Your supervisor, Richard Hartwell, is a friend of your father's. Convenient." Julian's hands trembled. "You're insane." "I also know you have a gambling problem. $43,000 in credit card debt spread across 6 cards. You've been borrowing from friends, making promises you can't keep." Alessandro tilted his head slightly. "Should I continue?" The bar had gone quiet. Conversations died. Even the piano player had stopped mid-phrase. Julian looked around desperately, searching for sympathy, for witnesses who might intervene on his behalf. But people looked away. No one wanted to be involved in whatever this was. "Vivian," Julian tried again, his voice cracking. "Please, we can talk about this." "No," Alessandro said simply. "You can't." He gestured toward the entrance, and the two men in suits moved forward with synchronized precision. "These gentlemen will ensure you leave without incident," Alessandro said. "And if you're thinking about contacting Miss Sterling again, through any means, remember that I now know everything about you. Where you go, who you see, what do you do when you think no one's watching?" He leaned in slightly, and his voice dropped to something cold and final. "I will be watching." Julian opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked toward the exit with jerky, uncoordinated steps. The two men flanked him, silent shadows ensuring he left the building. Alessandro turned back to Vivian. His expression softened, the dangerous edge retreating behind something gentler. "Come," he said quietly. "Let's get you somewhere safe." And this time, when Vivian walked toward the door, no one stopped her. The elevator climbed in silence, 47 floors of glass and steel, rising above the city lights. Vivian watched the numbers tick upward, her reflection ghost-like in the polished doors. Alessandro stood beside her, hands in his pockets, giving her space to breathe. When the doors opened, she stepped into a penthouse that looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering skyline. Everything was clean lines and muted elegance. Charcoal sofas, marble countertops, art that probably cost more than her yearly salary. And "The guest room is down the hall," Alessandro said, gesturing left. "Bathrooms attached. There are clothes in the closet. My sister stays here sometimes. They should fit." Vivian nodded, her throat still too tight for words. "Take whatever you need," he continued. "Food, shower, rest. The door locks from the inside. You're safe here." He moved toward the kitchen, then paused. "I'll be in my office if you need anything. Don't hesitate to ask." Vivian stood under the shower for 20 minutes,
letting water hot enough to sting wash away the memory of Julian's grip on her wrist. She scrubbed until her skin turned pink, until she could almost believe she'd left more than just the bar behind. The guest room was simple but luxurious. Soft linens, blackout curtains, a mattress that felt like sleeping on a cloud. She lay down, expecting her mind to race, expecting panic or regret, or the familiar loop of what-ifs. Instead, she fell asleep. Deeply, dreamlessly. For the first time in months, she didn't wake to phantom footsteps or the phantom buzz of her phone. Dawn light filtered through the curtains when Vivian finally emerged. Alessandro sat at the kitchen island with an espresso, reading something on his tablet. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Coffee?" he offered. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "My mother," Alessandro said quietly, staring into his cup. "She stayed with my father for 15 years. He was charming, successful, respected." He paused. "And violent." Vivian's breath caught. "I was 12 when I finally understood why she wore long sleeves in summer. Why she flinched at raised voices." His jaw tightened. "I couldn't protect her then. I was too young, too powerless." He looked at her directly. "I'm not powerless anymore." The weight of that statement settled between them, not a promise, but a fact. "You didn't have to help me," Vivian whispered. "Yes," Alessandro said simply. "I did." He stood, rinsing his cup with practiced efficiency. "Stay as long as you need. There's no timeline, no expectations." He headed toward his office, then stopped. "And Vivian, you're not alone anymore." The door clicked shut softly behind him. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian believed it. 3 days later, Vivian returned to work at the design firm where she'd spent the last 4 years perfecting architectural renderings. Her desk overlooked the street below, and she'd always loved the view, until now. "You're being watched," Alessandro had told her that morning over coffee. "2 of my men. You won't see them, but they're there." She'd wanted to protest, to insist she didn't need protection. But the memory of Julian's whispered threats kept her silent. The day passed without incident. Clients, deadlines, the familiar rhythm of work. Almost normal. Almost. Julian appeared outside her building at 6:15. Vivian saw him through the glass doors, pacing, agitated, checking his phone. Her stomach dropped. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. Before she could dial, Alessandro's name lit up her screen. "Don't go out the front," his voice came through, calm and certain. "Service exit, east side, Marco is waiting." "How did you—" "I'm watching. Go. Now!" She slipped through the back corridors, heart hammering. Marco, one of Alessandro's men, stood beside a black sedan, door already open, but Julian had seen her. "Vivian!" He rushed forward, desperation replacing his usual calculated charm. "Please, just talk to me. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Marco stepped between them, a wall of silent intimidation. "Back away," Marco said quietly. Julian's face twisted. "You can't keep me from her. I have rights. I'll call the police. I'll get a lawyer. Do it," came Alessandro's voice. Vivian turned. He stood near the building entrance, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "Call your lawyer," Alessandro continued, walking closer. "Ask him about the restraining order Miss Sterling filed this morning, or the police report detailing your threats at the restaurant, witnessed by 15 people and confirmed by security footage." Julian went pale. "Ask him about the formal complaints your employer received today from 3 former colleagues, all women, all documenting a pattern of harassment. Those are lies. The evidence disagrees." Alessandro's voice never rose, never wavered. "You're done, Julian. Walk away while you still can." That evening, back at the penthouse, Vivian found Alessandro in the kitchen preparing dinner. Pasta, simple and perfect. "You didn't have to do all that," she said softly. He looked up, something almost vulnerable crossing his features. "Yes," he said, "I did." She moved closer, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for believing in me." Alessandro's expression softened. "You were always worth believing." For the first time since the bar, Vivian smiled. Small, fragile, real. And Alessandro smiled back. The apartment Alessandro arranged was nothing like her old place, the one Julian knew, the one that still held ghosts. This was a loft in a quiet neighborhood, all exposed brick and tall windows flooding the space with natural light, secure building, doorman, privacy. "It's too much," Vivian had protested when he first showed it to her. "It's safe," Alessandro replied simply. "That's all that matters." She moved in on a Saturday, and Alessandro helped carry boxes, an expensive suit traded for a simple black t-shirt that did nothing to hide the strength beneath. For hours they worked in comfortable silence, building something that felt almost domestic, almost like a life. They fell into a rhythm. Alessandro would stop by after work, sometimes with takeout, sometimes just to check in. What started as brief visits stretched into hours. One evening, wine glasses empty and city lights glittering below, Vivian told him about the art history degree she'd abandoned, the gallery she'd dreamed of opening, how Julian had called it impractical, a waste of time, until she'd stopped talking about it altogether. "You let him take that from you," Alessandro said quietly. "I gave it to him," Vivian corrected, the truth bitter on her tongue. "I made myself smaller so he could feel bigger." Alessandro reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers, warm, steady, asking nothing. "Then take it back." The next weekend, Vivian bought art supplies for the first time in 3 years. Charcoal pencils, watercolors, canvas that still smelled of potential. She painted at the kitchen table while Alessandro worked on his laptop nearby, comfortable in shared silence. Her hands remembered what her mind had forced her to forget. Color returned to her world in more ways than one. "It's beautiful," Alessandro said one evening, studying her latest piece, abstract swirls of crimson and gold. "It's angry," Vivian replied. "That's allowed." She looked at him then, really looked, at the way he moved through her space like he belonged but never imposed, at the careful distance he maintained even when his eyes said he wanted to be closer. "Alessandro," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned, and the air between them shifted, charged. "I know," he said softly, understanding what she couldn't yet voice, "but you need time to heal, to find yourself again." "And if I already have?" His jaw tightened. For a moment, she saw the want, raw and barely restrained. Then he stepped back, though it clearly cost him. "Then I'll still be here," he promised. "When you're certain, when it's not gratitude or safety you're feeling, but something real." Vivian's heart ached with the rightness of it. "You're worth waiting for," Alessandro added quietly, and for the first time, Vivian believed she might be. Alessandro's phone rang at 2 a.m. Vivian heard his voice through the wall, low, clipped, dangerous. Minutes later, he appeared in her doorway, fully dressed. "Get dressed," he said quietly. "We're leaving." "What happened?" His expression was carved from stone. "Julian attacked a woman outside a bar tonight. She fought back. He's in custody." Vivian's blood turned to ice. "There's more," Alessandro continued. "When police searched his apartment, they found plans, photos of you, your schedule, building layouts." He paused. "He was going to hurt you, Vivian, badly." The room tilted. At the police station, Detective Morrison laid it out with clinical precision. Notebooks filled with Julian's handwriting. Dates, times, routes Vivian took to work. Photos taken from across the street, zoomed in on her windows. "He'd been planning this for weeks," Morrison said. "The woman tonight, she looks like you. Same height, same hair color." Vivian stared at the evidence spread across the table. Her life. dissected and documented by someone who claimed to love her. He kept a journal, Morrison added, sliding a page forward. She needs to understand. She needs to learn. When I'm done, she'll never leave again. The words blurred. Vivian felt Alessandro's hand at her elbow, steady, grounding, as darkness crept into her peripheral vision. The safe house was an hour outside the city, a modern cabin surrounded by woods, all windows and silence. Alessandro had brought her here without asking, understanding what she needed before she did. Safe, hidden, away. That night, the dam finally broke. Vivienne collapsed on the leather sofa, sobs tearing through her chest, months of fear and shame and rage pouring out in ugly, gasping waves. Alessandro sat beside her, pulling her close without hesitation. "I should have known," she choked out. "I should have seen—" "No," Alessandro said firmly. "This isn't your fault. None of it ever was." She clung to him, shaking. "I'm so tired of being afraid. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, of waiting for him to—" "He can't hurt you anymore," Alessandro interrupted, his voice rough with something she'd never heard before. "I won't let him, ever." Vivian pulled back, looking at him through tear-blurred eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" Alessandro's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "Because somewhere along the way," he said quietly, "protecting you stopped being about duty." He cupped her face gently and became about love. The world stopped. "Alessandro, you don't have to say anything," he continued. "I just needed you to know." But Vivian was already closing the distance between them, her lips finding his in an answer that needed no words. The courtroom was sterile and cold, all polished wood and fluorescent lighting that made everything look washed out. Vivienne sat in the gallery, Alessandro's presence a solid wall of support beside her, as the judge reviewed Julian's bail hearing. Given the defendant's documented stalking behavior, the attack on Ms. Chen, and the evidence of premeditated violence against another victim, the judge said, her voice crisp and final, "Bail is denied. Mr. Reed will remain in custody pending trial." Julian's head snapped up, face contorted with rage. For a brief moment, his eyes found Vivian's across the courtroom, and she saw it. The fury, the entitlement, the complete inability to accept that he'd lost control. But this time, she didn't look away. This time, she stared back until he was the one who flinched. Alessandro's hand found hers beneath the table, warm and steady, a silent reminder. "You're not alone." 3 weeks later, Vivian sat in the witness box, hands folded in her lap, facing a room full of strangers who would hear the worst moments of her life laid bare. The prosecutor was gentle, but thorough. "Can you describe the evening at the bar, Miss Sterling?" Vivian's voice shook at first, but grew stronger with each sentence. She told them about the threats, the bruises hidden under sleeves, the fear that had become her constant companion, the way Julian had made her feel like she was disappearing piece by piece until there was almost nothing left. "And when Mr. Valenti intervened," the prosecutor asked, "what did you feel?" "Safe," Vivian said simply. "For the first time in months, I felt safe." Julian's lawyer tried to paint Alessandro as some kind of vigilante, as if protection was a crime. But when they called Alessandro to the stand, he answered every question with unshakable calm, his testimony corroborated by security footage, witness statements, and the cold, hard evidence of Julian's obsession. When it was over, Julian was sentenced to 8 years. 8 years, Vivian could breathe. That evening, they returned to the safe house, the place that had become theirs over the past month. Alessandro poured wine while Vivian curled into the corner of the sofa, exhausted but lighter somehow. "It's over," she said quietly, still not quite believing it. Alessandro sat beside her, close enough that their knees touched. "It is." "I don't know what happens now," Vivian admitted. "I don't know who I am without fear driving every decision." "Then we figure it out," Alessandro said. "Together."
She turned to face him fully. Is that what you want? Together? His expression softened in a way she'd only glimpsed before, vulnerability beneath all that controlled power. I want mornings where I wake up beside you, he said quietly. I want to hear about your day, your dreams, the gallery you're going to open. I want arguments about what to have for dinner and lazy Sundays where we don't leave bed. He paused. I want something real, Vivian, with you. If you'll have me. Her eyes burned with tears, but these were different. Not fear or pain, but something warm and overwhelming. I've been so afraid, she whispered. Of trusting again, of letting someone close enough to hurt me. I know. But you've never asked me to be anything other than myself, she continued. You gave me space when I needed it. You protected me without controlling me. You waited. She reached for his hand. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. Alessandro's thumb traced circles on her palm. You were always worth seeing. Vivian leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. I choose this, she said firmly. I choose you. Not because you saved me, but because when I look at you, I see my future, and for the first time in years, that future doesn't terrify me. Alessandro kissed her then, slow and deep, and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, he smiled, really smiled. Then let's build that future, he said. One day at a time. And wrapped in his arms, Vivian finally understood what it meant to be free. 6 months later, Vivian stood in the center of her gallery, sterling contemporary, surrounded by white walls waiting to be filled with art. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the space she'd dreamed about for years, but never believed she'd have. It's perfect, Alessandro said from the doorway, 2 coffee cups in hand. She turned, smiling at the sight of him in jeans and a casual shirt, so different from the man in the navy suit who'd saved her that night. Though saved wasn't quite the right word anymore. He'd given her a chance. She'd saved herself. The opening is in 2 weeks, Vivian said, accepting the coffee. I'm terrified. You're ready, Alessandro replied, his confidence in her absolute. And looking around at what she'd built, piece by piece, dream by dream, Vivian realized he was right. Alessandro's world was darker than hers, she'd learned. Business dealings conducted in shadows, loyalty bought with respect and fear in equal measure. But he kept her separate from that darkness, protecting not just her safety, but her light. Still, she insisted on understanding. If I'm going to be part of your life, she'd told him one evening, I need to know all of it. So he introduced her to his world carefully. Marco and the other men who'd protected her became familiar faces. She learned the difference between legal business and the gray areas Alessandro navigated. She met his family, his mother, whose eyes held the same haunted recognition when she looked at Vivian, and his sister Sophia, who hugged her like they'd known each other for years. In return, Vivian brought Alessandro into hers. Gallery openings where he stood quietly beside her, letting her shine. Dinners with her friends, who'd watched her transformation with tearful relief. Art classes where she taught him to see color and light the way she did. You're terrible at painting, she teased one afternoon, looking at his decidedly abstract attempt at a sunset. But excellent at admiring the artist, he countered, pulling her close. They fit together in ways that surprised them both, her softness balancing his edges, his strength supporting her growth. 1 year after that night, Alessandro asked her to dinner at the same bar where everything had changed. Vivian hesitated at the entrance, old memories flickering. But Alessandro took her hand, soulmate, and together they walked inside. The corner table where Julian had whispered threats was empty. Alessandro led her to it without hesitation, reclaiming the space that had once held only fear. Why here? Vivian asked as they sat down. Because this is where your story began, Alessandro said quietly. Not with him. With you finding the courage to say yes when I asked if you wanted to leave. He reached across the table, taking her hand.
That night, I saw a woman trapped but not broken, afraid but not defeated. His thumb traced her knuckles. I saw someone worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth building a life with. Vivian's breath caught as he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Vivian Sterling, you are the strongest person I've ever met. You took your broken pieces and built something beautiful.
You turned your pain into art and your fear into freedom. He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down her cheeks, joy, pure and uncomplicated. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Later that night, standing at the window of their shared apartment, no longer his, no longer hers, but theirs, Vivian realized something profound. She hadn't just escaped Julian. She hadn't just survived. She had transformed. The woman who'd sat frozen in that bar, too terrified to speak, was gone. In her place stood someone who owned a gallery, who loved fearlessly, who'd learned that strength wasn't about never being broken. It was about choosing to rebuild. Alessandro wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to her temple. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm happy," Vivian said simply. "Really, truly happy." And as the city lights glittered below them, Vivian understood that this peace, this love, this life, was worth every bruise, every tear, every moment of fear. Because she'd fought for it, and she'd won.